Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're going to give it a minute or two as everybody logs on before we get started with the amazing Miss Sapphire here. We're excited to have this opportunity for her to share with everyone again. She really is great at presenting and sharing her knowledge and information. So you're all as excited as I am, but we will give it a minute and get started here in a second. As we get ready to get started here, I will point out if anybody is having any issues with sound, with echoes, with not hearing anything, that is an issue on your end. So someone just said they're hearing an echo. That's something on your end. It might be that two windows are open, or you may want to log off and log back on quickly. Sapphire and I have been sitting here chatting for quite a while now, getting ready, and we've not had any issues with echoes or sound or anything like that. So again, if you are experiencing any concerns with that, please check your settings. Make sure you only have one window open with the Zoom presentation, things like that. So someone said when you click on the link, two windows automatically open. So if you have two windows open, make sure you close one, please, so that you can hear without the echo. Give it a few more seconds here, make sure things are slowing down. Yeah, someone said when the app opens and the web browser, I know for me, it only opens one window, but or it pops out into the app, but some people it will open both on the web browser and the app. So just make sure only one's open, and that will hopefully help resolve any echo issues you have. But I think it looks like it's still jumping a bit. We'll give it a few more seconds. All right, it looks like things are slowing a bit, so I will go ahead and get started. We want to make sure that we maximize Sapphire's time here because she has so much information and knowledge to share with us. We don't want to waste any of our time. So for those of you that don't know, I am Megan Kramer. I'm the Professional Development Coordinator here with ICPN. And obviously we have the very talented Sapphire Robinson here with us today. So you are aware your cameras are off and your microphones are muted, and they will remain that way throughout our time together this morning. Please do use the chat box with questions, to further the discussion. When we join, it automatically registers who is here, so you don't need to give that information. But please do use it for questions. You can also use the question and answer box in here. Sapphire does have some fun interactive polls and stuff that she does during the presentation. So just be aware that you can put it in the chat box, but she's also using the polls, and that will give us automatic immediate results. So please do use the technology if you're able to. If not, obviously the chat box can be used for that, but we do encourage the use of the question and answer box as well. If you are new to us, please do be aware that when you are logged on, you have to be logged on with your own unique link that you received when you registered for this webinar. That way you will get your CEs. If you are not logged on your own link, if you're watching with other people, that's fine. But do you log on with your own link as well, and just leave that running so you can watch with someone else if you're doing that in a group. But I do encourage you to all to be sure that you're on your own link. If you're calling in, you actually dialed in. We are not able to send CEs for that. So you do need to be using the link. It can be on your phone, on your computer, that doesn't matter. Just make sure you're logged on with that link. And then you do need to be logged on for the majority of our time here today to be able to receive the CEs. When we are done, you will receive a satisfaction survey that automatically pops up on Zoom. And that is just gives us feedback on today's session, ideas for upcoming topics you'd be interested in. But then you will receive a separate survey to your email, and that is the one that must be completed in order to receive your CEs. So once you get that, probably give us about 24 hours. Sometimes the system's a bit slow in sending that out. So you'll get the survey, complete that, and then you should get your CE pretty quickly once you've completed that. If you are a BCBA, we are offering ACE approved CEs for this session. You'll get two ACE approved CEs for today's session. So if you are a BCBA, please email me and let me know that you are on this webinar. I will then send you the survey you need to complete, which you'll send back to me, and then I will send you your CE. I will drop my email in the chat box multiple times today, just so everybody has it. But again, that's just for BCBAs looking for the ACE approved CEs. Everybody else, you'll follow the same system we normally do when providing CEs. With that, I think that's all the housekeeping stuff I have, and I will hand it over to you, Sapphire.
Thank you so much, Megan. I appreciate you helping everyone understand how to navigate everything as we get started. Good morning, everybody. I'm happy to see you all virtually. And welcome to Say It Another Way. Today, we'll be talking about teaching functional communication to reduce challenging behaviors. All right, let's get started. So for our objectives, first, we're going to review some foundational background information on functional communication training, or FCT. We will also look at the research and segue into how to implement FCT effectively. Next, we will discuss how to avoid some common pitfalls. And lastly, we'll wrap up by going over some tools and resources to help everyone implement FCT successfully. All right, so let's get started with the fun activity. If you have a phone or a device, could you scan the QR code? And I would like for you to fill in the blank. Behavior is what? Blank. So give me 1 second. I'm going to share screens as people start to respond. All right. So communication is pretty big. Good. Yes, that's what comes to mind first. Behavior is neither good or bad. I love that response. Yes. Yes. It's not always predictable. Okay. Language, a form of communication, expression. These are some really, really good answers. Thank you to everyone who's participating. And what I notice is communication remains the most popular response, and I will have to agree. So as people continue to respond, we're going to move ahead and discuss this quote, which I really like. It elaborates the concept that behavior is indeed communication. So it reads, one cannot communicate because every behavior is a kind of communication. People who are aware of each other are constantly communicating. Any perceivable behavior, including the absence of action, has the potential to be interpreted by other people as having some meaning. And this quote comes from Everett and McKay, who's a software designer. But I really like this quote because it elaborates that familiar saying behavior is communication, and it goes on to even when it's nonverbal, right? It is still some form of communication, or even when it looks like inaction, someone is still, conveying something, and we're constantly trying to understand one another. So I really like this quote. So today we're going to jump into how we can help individuals expand their communication through FCT, functional communication training. So this teaches individuals different ways to express their needs or wants rather than engaging in challenging maladaptive behaviors. This intervention focuses on replacing those challenging behaviors with something that is more effective, and it promotes more positive interactions, right? And increases skills. So the big takeaway from this slide, for those who are not familiar with this, is the function part, the function in functional communication training. That is going to be the starting point in how to implement this effectively. With that being said, how familiar are you with the functions of behavior? So we have another QR code that you can scan, and feel free to complete the poll. It's just for me to get an idea who is familiar, who are not familiar. All right. Okay. So for the most part, people are moderately familiar. Most of the audience is, so that's pretty good. We have some somewhat familiar. All right. So today we're not going to go too deep into the functions of behavior, but we're certainly going to review them, and we're going to connect it to what that means in terms of functional communication training. Feel free to continue to submit your responses as we continue to move forward. So here is a review over the four functions of behavior within applied behavior analysis. Okay. Um, so when teaching a communication response or using FCT, it is so important to understand what is the function of the challenging behavior the individual is engaging in. And what we have listed here are the main four functions of challenging behavior. So first we have escape, which or avoidance. You can use either term. And what it means is the person may engage in a challenging behavior to either escape or delay engaging in some task, or really just to avoid something that is aversive, or to get out of something that is aversive to that person. So that could be tasks, but it's not limited to demands. It could also just be situations they do not like. The second function we have listed here is attention. What this means is that the individual may engage in a behavior that helps them receive some sort of social interaction from other people. A lot of times people assume attention only means talking to the person, but it literally could be your eye contact. It can be a physical interaction, such as a hug or affection. It could be comforting statements. It can also be something that we wouldn't necessarily assume, like a reprimand or negative attention, or being scolded, right? That's also a form of attention. The third function we have listed here is access to tangibles. Sometimes people just use the word access or tangibles, but what this means is the person is engaging in the behavior to get access to a preferred item or a food, a tangible item, something that is materialized, right? So this can be activities such as playing a game or like going somewhere, as well as a snack or just like a toy, the iPad, right? Different things like that. Money, right? Those are examples of tangible items that would fall into this category. And lastly, we have automatic or sensory. And what that means is the person is engaging in a behavior not because of any social interactions per se, right? Not because there's other people around, but because it produces a internal stimulation that's either pleasing to the person or that helps them alleviate pain. I like to always share that sometimes it's not that it just feels good, it may actually be soothing or stopping pain. So think of movement, someone who likes to run or deep pressure. And I know a lot of times we're providing that pressure, but sometimes they may clamp their hands this way or they're hugging themselves. Visual stimulation, looking at lines, looking at circles, looking at lights, looking at the visual, like sensory toys with the liquid dropping. Those are some examples. So just think of the different five senses and what an individual may do that doesn't necessarily require another person to provide. So that is my quick recap over the four functions just to help people who are not as familiar to become more acclimated, as this is really important when we're talking about FCT. So, in terms of functional communication training, what we just discussed is that all behaviors have a meaning, right? They serve a purpose. And in ABA, we look at that as the function, right? It is communicating something. So here is a table that just gives some quick examples of a scenario, including a different behavior and what the possible function could be. And what we can do with FCT to teach a more effective alternative way for that person to communicate. So in the first example, the individual became aggressive while completing chores, so their parents removed the task. Based on that situation, it's likely that maybe the function of their behavior is to get out of doing those chores, right? So that will fall into the category of escape. And what we would do is teach that person how to effectively escape that task without becoming aggressive with their parents. That would be the goal. So I'm not going to go through the other three in as much details, but the point is, in order to teach someone a communication response that's more effective, first, we need to identify the function. And one of the things I would like for you to notice in each of these scenarios, we're looking at how are people responding to the individual's engagement in the challenging behavior, right? Aggression happens, parents remove the task. So take a look at the other three and just notice what is happening after the individual engage in a challenging behavior. How is people in their environment, or how are people in the environment responding to them? It's important to mention this as well. Just because a behavior appears a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's related to the function. Okay, so in ABA, we call behavioral form topography, and that just describes how a behavior actually look like. If we're both observing the behavior, how does it look, right? Um, this information is very, very, very important. However, it does not directly correlate with the behavioral function. And the good thing is FCT can help with replacing many challenging behaviors despite their form, right? Or the age of the individual and how it appears. So let's take a look at this table. We have the same behavior occurring in different scenarios. So the first one is the situation I discussed from the previous slide. The second one discusses or describes an individual becoming aggressive toward a peer, so staff verbally redirects them. Based on this scenario, what could be the function is actually attention, right? Um, and what we would teach with FCT is for the person to effectively say, hey, come talk to me, pay attention to me, without becoming aggressive towards their peer. So that's an example of how the aggression could be the same form, right? It could be literally striking a person with the hand, but in two different situations, one is escape, the other is attention. So let's take a look at the other two. Someone becomes aggressive towards a staff person in the car, so the staff offers them an iPad. In this situation, the possible function could be accessing the iPad, which would be access to tangibles. What we could teach is, hey, how can they effectively communicate? I want iPad. Can I have the iPad? And the last example, a person or a child becomes aggressive towards a parent. So the parent gives the child a deep hug, like a bear hug. The possible function here could be some sensory or automatic, right? What we can do is try to teach that child or person, I need a squeeze. So these are just different examples of how the same behavior in the sense of the topography can have different functions and it will warrant a different communication response. So moving along, let's discuss some of the early research, right? Um, FCT was first introduced in a study by Carr and Duran back in 1985. The population consisted of four different students, two male, two female, and the study took place in a day school. So all of the individuals had different diagnoses and they engaged in different topographies of behavior. So that included poking others, pulling hair, knocking over objects, throwing tantrums, biting their hands, screaming, crying, right? Or even just refusing. So during this study, the first step was for them to assess the challenging behaviors, and they identified the primary functions of the behavior was attention and escape. So for behaviors that had a function of escape, they taught the individual to say or to communicate, I don't understand. In that instance, the teacher would respond to that by helping the student and providing a break and some assistance with different tasks in the classroom. And if the function of behavior was attention, they taught the individual to say or to ask, am I doing good work? And in that case, the teacher will come over and provide some praise and attention and let them know that they're doing really good. So here are the outcomes from that study. It's a lot of graphs, there's a lot of things going on, but what I like to point out is at the beginning of the study for each participant, what you'll notice is the dots are above zero. So that means of the intervals of the time frames where they were collecting the data, people were engaging in behaviors in a significant amounts, right? By the end of the study, it was down to zero for each participant. What the researchers did was track when when the individuals were taught the communication response and they continued teaching them these responses. And it did get worse in some cases before it got better. But what was really, really, really interesting is that all participants' behavior levels were reduced to 0% levels, and that it addressed a variety of different challenging behaviors. So over the years, researchers have used that foundational study to elaborate and explore different components of functional communication training. So here's a nice timeline. In no means is it covering every single functional communication training article. However, it does highlight some important findings. So in 1992, after that initial training, Carr and Duran, what they did was they tried to demonstrate, or they did demonstrate, that generalization was possible. So in the initial study, that was in a controlled environment at a day school, and what they did was generalize across different trainers or people who's actually implementing the FCT in settings. In 1998, what the researchers did in this case was confirm that FCT was effective for even more severe challenging behavior. And they also looked in how extinction played a role. So what extinction means is that instead of responding to the challenging behaviors in a way that was common or that was taking place prior to the FCT, they taught different people to respond by not giving any reinforcement to those challenging behaviors. And it actually helped with 21 different cases. In 2000, researchers introduced strategies to increase tolerance for delayed reinforcement, which created a critical step in the FCT process. So what this means is after teaching a person how to communicate with this alternative way, what happens if we don't always respond to it, right? Because there's going to be situations where you're not going to be able to immediately respond to the desirable behavior in a natural setting. So what this article did was establish a process and a way to systematically delay reinforcement, making it more practical. In 2016, researchers analyzed 25 different ways on how to continue thinning out the schedule of reinforcement or that delayed gratification, right? For individuals who did use a different communication response. And this just continued to show that FCT can be effective outside of the classroom or these highly controlled environments. We can use FCT in real ways, and it could be effective. In 2018, researchers showed that different ABA strategies combined with FCT helped with some very, very serious behaviors, and it helped to reduce the behavior from resurging or coming back. So what they did was they used different antecedent strategies and behavior strategies such as behavioral momentum to help the new communication or the FCT skill to maintain. And lastly, the last article here in 2020 showed that reinforcing other behaviors also helped just with making FCT more practical and for treatment to maintain its effectiveness. So, what does all of this mean? What is all the research saying? It is demonstrating that over 35 plus years of research, FCT is still very powerful and it could be very practical. And the very first article we discussed, it reduced the problem behavior on an average of 80 to 90% of its applications. In a different article that was not on the timeline, it demonstrated how over 90% of published intervention studies are addressing severe problem behavior. So we're thinking of like super unsafe or dangerous situations where those engagements are reducing by 90%, which is huge. FCT has also been shown to be effective across children, um, younger adults or teenagers, adults across homes, schools, clinics, and residential settings. And it helps with all different functions of behavior, all four functions. This is a very powerful tool. And today we're just going to talk more about how can we use this tool effectively. So we have another QR code. I would like for everybody to just take some time and think of someone that you are currently supporting. Based on what we just reviewed, what do you think they may be trying to communicate with their behaviors? So feel free to scan that QR code and I'll share some of you guys' results. All right. So boredom, that's a big one. That's a big one. I have nothing to do. Oh, wanting friends, wanting to connect. Ooh, someone going through dementia. Okay. That is a different situation, but still very, very, very interesting. They're still communicating something. Illness, not feeling well, yeah. I want some attention. Feeling overwhelmed. Hunger. That goes into that automatic, right? I'm afraid. Yes. Just unable to say how I'm feeling. Just being frustrated, right? Like I'm trying to connect with you and you don't understand me. So these are some really, really good responses. And I love how Slido starts like creating categories up here as there is some overlap. But boredom is a huge one. I see that a lot. I see that a lot. I really appreciate you guys for participating. So continue to share your thoughts, and we're going to continue to move ahead in the presentation. So I believe this is why most of you guys are here, right? We've talked about some research. We talked about some foundational concepts within FCT. Now let's get into how do you implement it? How does it work? So this article here is one of my favorites. This is what helped me get a better understanding of how to create an FCT program while I was in grad school. But this article lays out the best practices and it does it in a very concise way. So we are going to overlap the best practices that has been given here, and we're just going to talk about it in a little bit more details, okay? So the first step in FCT is identifying the function. And we went over that briefly, but this is done through a functional behavior assessment. And it's important for you to have um, some data collection, right? To see a pattern. It's not likely that you can just look at one instance of behavior and say, yep, I know the function. I think a lot of times we tend to do that because life is busy. We have a lot of things to do, a lot of things going on. So we may, do one or two observations and, yep, I definitely know the function. While that is not necessarily the best way to go about it, it would be better to do a full on FBA. And this is going to help you identify if it's maintained by, or what is the why, right? If it's escape, attention, tangibles, or automatic reinforcement. So the first step for those who are not BCBAs is to review the person's behavior support plan, which will include their FBA. In addition, you may also want to collect some ABC data. That is how you get your behavioral patterns. That's how you're able to clearly see them and be able to see the different variables at play. More times than not, there's never one variable at play. Especially in a natural environment such as a school or a day program or at home. There's always a lot of different things happening at once. So it's so good to get that ABC data and look at what is happening, right? Um, Another step that you may take is interviewing different people. And you can use different indirect assessment within ABA to do this, or you can just also talk to caregivers and learn more about what is happening before and after the behavior. It is important to consult and collaborate with the behavior analyst or the behavioral support team during this phase if you are not one. I really encourage you to reach out to them and just say, hey, I want to collect some ABC data, or hey, I want to look at this behavioral pattern, because that's going to help you get a better idea of what is the why behind the behaviors. A lot of times it feels like a behavior is happening out of nowhere. However, in the science of ABA, there's always a why, most times. So another side note is you need to consider the context of the behavior as well. A lot of times what I see happens, and something that I had to learn as a behavior analyst, I may be collecting ABC data at home, right? The behavior happens. This is the topography. This is how people are responding at home. However, when this person go to day program, the behavior happens. There's a different response. It's a different environment. It may be a different time of day. This is to note that behavior is contextual, and it's important to understand that the function may change depending on the context of the behavior. So this gets into a deeper analysis of that behavior, and not to just go off of one place, one person even collecting ABC data. It's very important to collaborate with the team. And we'll talk more about this later on in this presentation on some things that can help different behavior analysts have a deeper analysis of the function of behavior. So the second step in FCT is to teach a communication response, right? So know that this response should be easy for the person to actually use. That's one part. So we want to keep in mind, what is the individual's repertoire? Are they verbal or non-verbal? Do they respond to pictures and visuals? If so, is it actual pictures, or is it like the pic or the stick man pictures, right? What about objects? Do they respond to objects? Maybe they have some hearing impairments or vision impairments. Are we using braille or different like texture objects? It's very important for the communication response to be something that is low effort for the individual to learn. So that's one part. And even if the person is verbal, is it one word or is it 5 words that you're teaching them? So that's one thing to consider. The other part is it widely recognizable? So I love ASL, right? American Sign Language. I love that we have this tool and there's so much research behind how it's changed so many people's lives. But one of the barriers to it is in order for a person to use it effectively, their caregivers need to know how to use it. They need to understand what the different signs are. Um, and I know some people, they will make up their own signs, and that's fine if that person is going to always be with someone that can understand them. So that's the other part. When we're teaching these communication response, we need to understand the person's world. Who are the people supporting them? Are they going to recognize the sign? Are they going to understand it? And if not, how can we put procedures in place so that they are able to learn what this person is communicating? So below, we have some different examples. The first example is in a school setting. Um, the child is engaging in some attention-seeking behaviors for the teacher. Something that we may teach that child is simply to raise their hand. A lot of times when we think of FCT, we don't consider raising a hand as a communication response, but it is, right? It's a gesture. It's signaling to the teacher, hey, I need your attention. Whether that's I need a break or I need help, it's a more appropriate way to get attention from the teacher. In the second example, this is in a group home setting. An adult is trying to escape chores. Something we may teach that person to say is break, please. It's simple. We could really just take off the please. We don't need the nicety. But if that person is saying break or break, please, then staff can say, okay, we'll give you a break or we'll help you set up your break, and they'll be able to respond to that rather than the individual engaging in challenging behaviors to get out of doing those chores. In the third example, this individual don't have verbal behavior. So they're nonverbal. They do not use vocal verbal language, right? But they engage in challenging behavior to get access to different items in their environment. What we could use, and what I often use, is a low-tech device like a picture board. So just the board of pictures. So on here, I think that's like an iPad, like an AAC device, or you could just make a picture board where it's different squares of preferred items, and you can limit it to as little or as many the person can actually scan and look at for them to say, hey, I want iPad, or hey, I want my stuffy. Hey, I want chips. You could literally just put 4 pictures on there if that's where they're at, or you could put more, right? And they can point to things and show it to the people who are supporting them. In the last example, it discusses an adult in a day program who is seeking connection, but they don't have that vocal verbal language, right? That's not a skill, or yeah, that's not a part of their repertoire. So what we could teach them is to start tapping people on the shoulders. And I know different agencies and different settings have different rules about, personal space and things like that. But a lot of times I have found it helpful, especially for those who are engaging in aggressive behaviors where they're like hitting people. You can shape up that behavior to become a tap or even a wave. So that way, it is communicating to the staff around them, the people around them, that they're seeking connection, maybe even a thumbs up. So it's important when you're teaching a communication response to think of the person's repertoire and to think about the people who are going to receive their communication response. Do they recognize it? All right, the third step. Implement effectively. I know this sounds super simple, right? And we're going to get into the weeds of this later on in the presentation. But one of the biggest drawbacks to FCT is that the effectiveness depends on different variables. So on one hand, we know that it works, right? We just went over 35 plus years of research. We know FCT works. However, a lot of times it is not being implemented effectively. So what this is describing is the difference between efficacy and effectiveness. Okay. Efficacy refers to how well it works in the perfect world. We have complete control over the environment, over how it's being implemented. It's being implemented by highly trained individuals, and we're only dealing with one person at a time, right? Whereas effectiveness, hey, you're not going to be in control of all of the different variables. This is more of your real world application. You may not be able to just work one-on-one with that individual. You may have to also support different people in a room, right? You may not even have extensive training with that person. So how do you overcome these barriers? And how do we implement it in a way where we can increase the effectiveness? Because the efficacy is there. The research is showing the efficacy. How do we increase effectiveness? Um, I'll be referencing this study here that explored this concept in 2020. And what they did was find that 90% of FCT's application initially saw success in reducing challenging behavior, but only 53% of those applications saw challenging behavior go to 0% levels. Okay. And most of the outcomes is because it was implemented by experts, whereas 36% of successful outcomes was by people who learned how to teach that delayed gratification to the reinforcement. The challenges that came up was care teams having multiple caregivers and staffs with different experience levels, competing demands, right? On one hand, a client may be expected to do one thing with this one person at this one place, but then when they get to a different location with a different person, there's different expectations, and that causes confusion. Delays in reinforcement too soon. Sometimes FCT starts strong, right? We go in there, we're starting to teach them, and it's starting off strong, but then over time, people get a little lax, and now we're not reinforcing that communication response in a systematic way to gradually fade it out. Overall, just inconsistent follow through among the people who are implementing it. So these variables can reduce effectiveness even when we know FCT has the empirical data to show that it is widely effective. So here are some considerations on to increase the effectiveness of implementing FCT. First, simplify. Keep it easy for everybody. As you are working with your staff, parents, teachers, any caregiver that's going to implement the FCT procedures, it is so important to make it simple for them to do. Okay? And we're going to talk about how you can do that. Secondly, there needs to be ongoing caregiver training. One time is just simply not enough. One of the things that I've learned the hard way, unfortunately, is that most times people need to see things happen in the moment to really grasp the concept. We can sit up here and do like a lecture style training. I can make a beautiful PowerPoint. I can write up about a great plan and list it all out using concise language. However, if I'm not taking the time to model it, practice, role play it, provide feedback, and do that until a person is actually implementing with accuracy. A lot of times the training is not effective. So one of the things that I try to do is teach the FCT initially and then continue to go out and not just observe the individual or just have team meetings, but to take that time to go out shoulder to shoulder and train the people who are going to be implementing FCT, shoulder to shoulder. I do it, we do it, you do it, right? Thirdly, it's important to teach your individual who's engaging in a challenging behavior how to tolerate delays. That is a skill and it needs to be taught. And it can be taught in a very, very systematic way. This is going to help the functional communication response that we teach them to maintain. Because in the real world, there are different things happening, and staff or caregivers, parents, teachers, they may not be able to respond immediately when that person emits that communication response. So, what can they do while they wait? That's something to think about. Fading prompting procedures. Um, I think it becomes like second nature almost like a rote response as caregivers to just go in and just tell a person what to do. Tell me you need a break. Use your words, right? Pointing at pictures, holding things up. That is great, especially at the beginning, right? We want them to learn. We want to give them those prompts, especially so they can acquire the skill and know, like, hey, I'm here to support you. I'm not going to leave you hanging. I'm going to help you. However, what can happen is that individual become dependent on your prompts. Now, the only time they use their words is when you tell them to use them. Is that really effective? This one is a big one. Consistency. It is so hard, right? It's so hard. Sometimes it's just outside of our control. We're not always in control of who are we staffing, um, their background, experience, their buy-in, right? Their willingness to even try these things. However, while that training is taking place, while that teaching is taking place, it's important for you to show up in these different environments and to meet people where they're at. Meet them in their settings, meet them where they're at with their knowledge base. So that way you could properly train them and increase the consistency. Also, it's important to put an emphasis that, hey, we're going to do this here. We need to do this here as well. And have this collaborative approach where everyone is on the same page as much as possible. This kind of connects to the that tolerance to delays at the beginning. Is so important to make sure you're immediately acknowledging the alternative communication and you're providing appropriate reinforcement. So we'll talk more about that later, but we need to make sure we're matching functions here. I might acknowledge you, but am I actually matching the function of the challenging behavior? So the other part is we need to have a treatment package approach, right? That is how practical applications work. And with saying that, that means what can we do to even prevent the challenging behavior? How can we prevent things from happening? Um, and I have some cool resources that'll be shared later at the end of the training that can help you all determine what are some possible antecedent interventions and how do they align with the function. And the last one here, can we make it natural? Right? So at the beginning, we're going to create opportunities because we're trying to teach that person. We want them to know we hear you, we value your voice, we value your words, we see your efforts. But at the same time, how can we create this so that it is occurring a part of their natural routines and their daily interactions? Moving forward, the fourth part of implementing FCT is to reinforce the communication. So I spoke about this, on the previous slide about making sure we're implementing that training effectively. It's so important that we are reinforcing immediately. So when the person is using that different communication response, we have to respond to it right away at the beginning. And that gets into how you have high quality reinforcement. So within ABA, there's certain considerations when we're talking about increasing a skill or a behavior. And we're looking at the immediacy or the timing of it. We're looking at the magnitude, which is the size and intensity of it. We're looking at the quality. How desirable is it to that person? And then the other factor is deprivation versus satiation. So I'm gonna go over these things in a little bit more details. We talked a lot about that timing, and the reason why it matters is because at the beginning, the timing is going to help the learner connect. When I do this, this happens. And if that is happening immediately, they're able to make that connection. In terms of magnitude, I like to use an example where a parent was using M&Ms to help their child learn how to use the toilet, right? But at the beginning, she was giving him like one M&M. Is that really enough, right? Is that enough in the quantity for him to say, hey, I'm gonna go to the bathroom? Is one M&M something that's going to motivate me? So I want you to think about that in terms of communication. If a person's saying, hey, talk to me, and you come up and you just say hi and walk away, is that really enough in the intensity? Right? Maybe it should be more exaggerated. Maybe they want some enthusiasm. Maybe they want a short phrase or like a compliment. So it's just thinking about the intensity. The reinforcement must be enough in magnitude to be valuable to the person. The higher the magnitude of the reinforcer, the quicker the individual actually acquires the communication that we're trying to teach them. And that also connects to the desirability. So this goes back to what I mentioned before. Yeah, you're acknowledging that the person is using their words, but is it actually valuable? Is it matching the function of their behavior? Are they accessing things that is preferential? Is it based on their preferences or what we think that they like? So these things are important to consider. For example, let's say the function of behavior is access and the person is touching iPad on their picture board. Are you giving them literally 1 minute of iPad time? Is the iPad even charged? Are you giving them a dead iPad? Are they limited to sitting at the table with the iPad plugged into the wall because it's not charged? That is going to change whether or not they actually desire it, right? And the last part, deprivation versus satiation. If a person has limited access to something, they're going to want more of it, right? So if I only get iPad during certain hours of the day, that's going to increase it being more desirable for me. However, if I get iPad in the morning when I eat breakfast, in the car while I'm transitioning, I make a today program, I get it on my breaks, and I have just free access to it. Excuse me. That iPad may actually decrease in value. So it's important that we're having the right amount of deprivation to satiation. And in no means am I suggesting for you to deprive a person in the sense of they just never have access to it and they have to jump through hoops to get it. However, there do needs to be some limits, right? We need to discuss what is safe to do so, what is within their rights. How can we set up contingencies as well? And all of the words, the language being used here comes from ABA jargon. And unfortunately, it has like a double meaning in terms of like common or ordinary everyday language. So I just want you to keep in mind deprivation doesn't mean that you're just taking everything away from a person. It means that you are strategically creating opportunities for them to access it. Or you're making sure that it's not something that they just have all the time. Or in that case, maybe that's not going to be the item or the activity or the person that is going to be the reinforcer. Maybe we need to look at something different. So the next step in FCT is to implement differential reinforcement. Differential reinforcement involves reinforcing an appropriate alternative. I'm sorry, there's a lot of A's right there. An appropriate alternative behavior while no longer providing that reinforcement for engagement in the challenging behavior. That is what DR is. That's what differential reinforcement is. FCT is actually a form of that. And in the box here, what you'll notice is some differences and similarities. So we have an example where a person is engaging in aggressive behavior to escape a task. Regular old differential reinforcement would be to reinforce the person for sitting with having calm hands at the table. They're not really communicating anything. They're just sitting there calmly. So we may go up like, hey, I see your nice calm hands. You have a calm body. I like how you're staying in your seat. You're being safe with others. That is a form of differential reinforcement. In functional communication, what we would do is connect that function and teach a communication response for that individual to say, break, please. And we will still provide that same reinforcement. Thank you for telling me you need a break. And also actually providing the break. That's the other part. We actually have to provide the break. So both of these strategies are definitely effective by providing acknowledgement and reinforcement for these appropriate behaviors. But the green box talks about it in terms of FCT. In terms of extinction, as I've mentioned throughout this presentation, that involves withholding reinforcement. And when you do something like that, there are certain risks associated with it. And I really love this article here by Tarbox and colleagues from 2023 that talks about ways to minimize that risk, right? And they call it kind extinction. And what that do is it refers to applying extinction in a way where it's more supportive by, yes, we're not going to acknowledge the challenging behavior, but we are going to actively validate that individual's experience and reinforce any approximation for appropriate communication. okay, or any approximation of desirable behaviors. So what this can look like is prompting communication early. When you're starting to see some warning signs that a person is escalating, you may start prompting that communication and offering some reinforcement at that level. Um, a part of that is prompting coping strategies. I have a person that I'm supporting right now where what we do is we prompt the communication response and we honor it. And then immediately after that, we're prompting coping strategies. I've also seen this done flip flop where you prompt that coping strategy like, I'm noticing that didn't go your way. How do you feel about taking a walk with me or taking a deep breath? Right? That's really good to do early on when you're starting to see those early warning signs, or even if you know that there's going to be an event taking place or a situation that the person finds aversive. That also means you want to reinforce generously. We want to give it out. When a person is slightly worked up, but they're doing their best, putting forth those efforts to calm themselves and they're receptive, we want to make sure that we're reinforcing them in those approximations. That also means that we're maintaining a calm, supportive presence. We're not going to scold or reprimand or, having the scrunch eyebrows or looking disappointed. Those things may inadvertently actually escalate the behavior. So it's important to try to maintain your neutrality, stay calm, and just have a supportive presence. Show that you're there to help. So when we don't do these things and we just have extinction alone, what that can look like is you're ignoring the person or you're blocking them, like you're restricting their movement. And it's not that extinction alone is not effective, it's just that it can actually lead to some emotional responding. People may become even more frustrated. People may actually escalate engaging in the very behavior that you're trying to avoid. With kind extinction, it just really help address those risks. It helps reduce the likelihood of an increased emotional response. It helps the individual learn, like, hey, when I'm doing this communication thing using what they taught me, different things happen. I get what I need. I get what I want. I feel heard. And it helps it keep that therapeutic rapport. Many times I've seen people implement very sound strategies with extinction, but now the person is afraid of you or the person avoids you. Um, this creates a more therapeutic rapport. And it's also aligned with some good ethics, and it demonstrates compassion and just that you are committed to some effective care while also validating that person experience. The fifth step is to build tolerance. So this was discussed as far as implementing effectively. We need to teach the individual to wait. And how you can do this is by starting with that immediate reinforcement at the beginning. They use the alternative communication, immediately reinforce them by acknowledge that they did the communication response and providing the attached reinforcer that is involved in the communication training. In the second step, you're going to start introducing a brief delay. And when we say brief, we mean brief, 1 or 3 seconds. Let's just wait before you acknowledge it and provide that reinforcement. While you're doing this, you actually want to provide praise. Hey, thank you for waiting. You want to say that because that's going to also increase that waiting behavior. And you're going to acknowledge, thank you for communicating what you need, right? You communicated what you need. I appreciate you communicating with me. And now I'm here to help you. The thought is that you will slowly extend this delay based on how they are responding. So you may have to hang out in a certain duration for a while. If they only could tolerate 3 seconds, we're going to stay there until that becomes something that they can tolerate much more. And then maybe we're going to move up to 5 seconds. And over time, the thought is for you to consistently increase the duration of time that they're waiting to make it more practical for the environment that they're in. While they are waiting for whatever reinforcer you are going to provide, it is also important uh, to let them know that they're doing a good job and to combine it with other supports. So you might want to use a timer. I highly recommend giving them something to do while they wait. Having something that they can fidget with, look at, reference, use, whether it's a coping strategy or it's an activity, that would be very important. Um, some of those, some of these things are antecedent strategies, and we're going to talk more about that too later on in the presentation. But it may be helpful for you to just provide reinforcers before they're even asking for it. Before that happens, periodically through the day on a schedule, go up to that person and just provide it to them. That's going to increase their tolerance to wait because now they don't always have to ask for it to get it, right? And as always, it's so important to remain calm and supportive. So, we just went over the actual steps of implementing FCT and some key considerations. I believe this is our pause time.
Yes. Do you want to do a few questions or do you want a quick break?
Um, if we have time, we could try to do a few questions.
Okay. So thank you all so much for your participation in the chat. There's been a lot of good questions in there and a lot of discussion and support being offered in there as well as resources. So that's always really helpful. We appreciate that. Um, so one question that was asked is it a good idea to ignore a behavior for a short period of time if another resident is not involved or another individual is not involved?
I'm sorry, can you repeat it again?
Is it a good idea to ignore a behavior for a short period of time if another individual is not involved in it?
So that is a hard question because it really depends on that person and the engagement in their behavior. So in order to answer that, we need to do some assessing to see where we're at. And it's not necessarily about like implementing the plan, ignoring for that short period of time, as much as what is your goal? If you're teaching the communication response at the beginning and you're at the early stages, it's very important to not ignore that communication response. If we're talking about extinction in terms of the challenging behaviors, that's going to be based on their behavioral pattern, right? And how do they respond? That could be very effective if hey, the function is attention and they shift their attention, they kind of just go about and do something different when you ignore it for a brief period of time, but that's really going to be determined through assessment. Good
Absolutely.
question.
There have been a few questions about how approaches for supporting people who are nonverbal. I feel like you've already started to address some of that, with the use of visuals, and I know you're going to come on to more of that information later on. So we're going to skip over those questions for now. For those of you who have asked that, if you don't feel like they've been answered fully by the end, please do circle back and, drop another question in the chat or in the question and answer box. Um, let's see. Do you have any suggestions for supporting someone who is blind or both blind and nonverbal?
Okay, yeah, this was asked before, and that is very hard. It's very hard when they're when I'm sorry, blind and nonverbal, right?
Mhm.
Um, that can be very hard because one of the quick things I could say is, "Oh yeah, let's use Braille." However, how many of us actually know how to read Braille? I don't know how to read Braille. So, some of the research that I have read and some of the things that I've seen is that people have used textured items such as like they call them like buttons or Big Mac buttons. I've seen people put different textures on top of the buttons, and when that person hits a button, there's a vocal verbal response that go out that is recognizable for people, so we're able to communicate. I'm assuming you can also do it with Braille if you have someone that do know Braille and who can teach the person that. I've also seen people use objects itself. You can have different objects with different textures, and when they pick up an object, have it in front of them or nearby them, and they feel the object they want, that is associated with a different communication response. So I've seen that. But it can become tricky because now there's other limitations. And so we have to just think about what can we teach the person and the people who's working with them so they
Mhm.
can understand each other.
Um, I think should we do a quick break, and then come back and we can hit more questions at the end?
Sure.
How long do you want to do? It's 11:16 now, and we go until 12.
Oh, okay. How about we do like a quick 5 minute break?
All right, so we will be back at 11:21. All right, we are back. So whenever you are ready, Sapphire, go ahead. I'll hand it over to you again.
All right, guys. So I'm looking at time and I want to be mindful that we don't go over and we're able to go over some of the questions. I was able to look through the chat and you guys are asking some really awesome questions, and I would love to be able to discuss it further. So moving forward, we're going to talk about some of the common pitfalls within FCT and what makes it not effective, right? And what's outside of those best practices. So what I notice a lot, FCT may fail in different settings, and what I see is caregivers responding to the challenging behavior. We're teaching communication responses that are just too difficult, and inconsistency, right? And implementation. So if a challenging behavior still results in that identified function, right? Whether it's attention, escape, a tangible, or even the automatic sensory, that behavior is going to continue. So what we do to address this is that kind extinction, where we're not necessarily reinforcing the challenge and behavior, but we're acknowledging the individual and we're reinforcing the communication response. Okay. How do we fix the second bullet point? We go back to the drawing board and we see what is in that learner's repertoire. Um, we want to make sure that is less effort for them. Can we change a sentence into a one or two word phrase? I love AAC devices, but sometimes it could just be too complicated. It's too complicated for them to navigate to the different folders and tabs. Maybe we need to go down a step and either only have one or two icons on the device, or maybe let's use pictures instead, right? That's just one simple sheet or frame. And when it comes to consistency, this one is really, really hard. What I tend to do is going back to what I mentioned earlier. In order to increase consistency, I start implementing the FCT myself across environments so they can see me do it. I do it first. If I show you that this can be effective, right? And I'm doing it and I create space for us to do it together, that's going to increase the likelihood of that person continuing to do this. Now, I understand some people may think, well, now they're just going to rely on me to do it all the time. And most of us, I'm assuming on this call, is not always available to directly work with the individual. So instead, I think it's important to do what is called behavior skills training, right? And take that time to model it for the person, be there for them to answer any questions, and understand what is it that may be the barrier. There may be something in a way. Maybe they need a cheat card, a cheat sheet to be reminded of it. Of the steps of how to do it. Maybe they don't have the items or the objects to implement effective reinforcement, especially if it's something that's tangible. So I think it's very important to actually just get out there and show them the consistency from your standpoint first, right? How to implement it and reinforce their behaviors, reinforce their efforts in the moment. And then start to get a better idea of what are those barriers or limitations as to why they are not implementing. So another issue is reinforcement. This is so important. This is a critical aspect of functional communication training. And if the reinforcement is not correct, everything else will fail, despite what you're doing. It's just not going to work. So we mentioned or discussed when reinforcement is delayed too early. It's very important to track how the person is responding, track their engagement and challenging behavior when you're responding immediately, and to do that gradual fade, right? It has to be a systematic gradual fade. And it's not just based on, oh, today I'm going to do 1 minute and tomorrow I'm going to do 30 minutes. This needs to be more of a systematic thing where we're actually paying attention. I'm going to use a timer, even if it's for myself, because the individual may not need it, even though I think we all benefit from a timer, especially the people we serve. Um, Set a timer so that way you are getting some real live data like, hey, when we waited for 1 minute, he did great. But when it was 10, that was too long. So now you know, right? And to create a plan where it's very systematic, it should be gradual anyway. So this is from the previous slide. This is also a reinforcement issue. The issue is the second bullet point talks about you're reinforcing the challenging behavior. If this person knows I throw my cup, and when I throw my cup at the wall, that means I want more water, and you just pick up the cup and put in the water without creating a contingency, guess what's going to happen? The cup is going to continue to be thrown. Even if you're saying things like, hey, use your words as you're just providing the water in a cup. So this gets into placing things on that kind extinction and reinforcing approximations of the communication response. Weak reinforcers. This talks about that magnitude, that desirability. How often is the person coming in contact with the reinforcement? If you're providing the wrong reinforcer, this will not reduce the challenge in behavior. Okay. It's just not. So we need to make sure that we're providing things that are desirable by the people that we are serving. And there's a way for you to learn what is it that they desire through different assessments, different preference assessments, different observations, and collaboration with the BCBA. Also, this is also a moment where it's not a one or done. There's different types of analyses you can do. To compare the magnitude of something and to understand what is necessary, right? What is the bare minimum or the lowest amount that is necessary in order for that person to find something valuable? So these are things that we can do to make sure we're creating the right level of magnitude and desirability with our reinforcement. The last one is something that I see often. We must identify the function, and this is something that can also be ongoing because behavior is contextual. This is also not a one and done. Okay, we did a FBA, we did a BIP, is certainly this. That's not necessarily the case, especially if this individual is coming in contact with different contexts across their day. There's certain changes. We need to also consider the role of medication and medical factors. So it's very important to make sure that you are identifying the correct function when you are doing FCT. Here are some common training issues. Um, Functional communication training is only effective when it's implemented by people who have the proper training. Okay, so this goes back into the efficacy versus the effectiveness. It's important when we're training people to use FCT that they understand the function of behavior. They may not need to understand the complexities of of function of behavior and things of that nature, but it's very important for them to understand the why behind the individuals that they serve. Many times I come across people who say they just do it out of the blue, or they're just mad, right? They're just mad, they're just angry. And it's like, well, let's explore that. Let's talk more about that and provide them with the information that they need so they could better understand the behavior itself, the challenging behavior itself. So that helps a lot. Um, Effective training should also include prompting and reinforcement procedures for when the individual is learning the communication response. So what that means is when you're teaching someone, it's very important that you also, or teaching a staff person, it's very important that you show them how, when to prompt a person. What do you use? Is it a verbal prompt? Is it a physical prompt? Is it a gestural prompt? How quickly do you prompt them? Do you allow the person to make a mistake first? Do we correct the mistake? Is it errorless? Do you want to do this where there is no mistakes being made at all? Those things are very, very important to consider so they'll know how to teach the client, the learner. It's also very important for them to understand how quickly they need to reinforce and when you're doing that systematic fade. The third bullet point gets into that extinction piece. When and how to withhold reinforcement. This is going to be very, very individualized. So it's going to be based on the individual's threshold, right? The risk of engagement in challenging behavior. What happens when they engage in that behavior? How do they respond to planned ignoring techniques? Do they have any coping skills? Is there some other things that we need to consider? And how does it look like when we're withholding that challenging behavior? Are we avoiding giving direct eye contact? Are we looking out of our preferential? Do we have like codes? So a lot of times, when I will implement a plan ignoring technique, if I'm in a busy environment, how do we signal to everybody, all the different people in the environment that may want to help you, that this is not the time for them to intervene, right? Do you have a code that says, hey, we're waiting? That's what I would do. I would do this sometimes. This is kind of universal for like, hey, don't say nothing. And that I noticed that has triggered people in the past, but it's like, do you have a process of teaching them how to implement these extinction procedures? Number four, how do you implement the schedule of reinforcement? So what that means is going back to that systematic fading or that gradual fading. How does that look like? When they're asking for access to iPad or to have a snack or to have an activity, is there a certain limit? Let's say they're using break cards to communicate. You're teaching a person to say, hey, I need a break, and they hand over a card. Are you giving them an infinite a number of cards they can use, or do they get 3 cards a day? Right? And after the 3 are done, they're done. So it's very important to look at this as a system. It's not just simply a strategy that you implement, but it's more or less a process and a system with different moving parts. And you have to critically think through it and make a plan. And it's okay if the plan change. If you start implementing and you're learning things about your learners because you're constantly assessing their behavior, change the plan. Just make sure you're training people on those changes and that you're informing them on the different components of the plan. And the last thing, which I cannot stress enough, it's so important to train people by actually doing it yourself. Model. Please model it. Model it, even if you're doing a pretend model situation and they're pretending to be the individual, and you guys are just taking time to go over this without the individual. That is so, so important. This creates space for people to figure out what is it that they need. And it's helpful for you to understand what is it that they need. A lot of times we're providing training to people by just talking at them and giving them some written documentations. And when things don't aren't implemented, we're like, well, I did a training. Did you model it with them? Did you role play? Did you create a Q&A? Did you give them the feedback and let them know like, hey, you're doing great in this area. This is an area of growth for you. So these situations here are some common training considerations to make sure things are effective when you're doing FCT. So, as we're starting to wrap up, it's important to note that functional communication training alone is not enough. So, as I mentioned, this is a process, it's a system, and it's more like a package deal. And it's important for us to think of what are ways we can prevent this behavior using antecedent strategies. So, antecedent strategies are preventative based strategies that reduce the likelihood of a challenging behavior occurring in the first place. In an article um, by Carr in 1999, what they did was Carr and colleagues, they created a multi-component intervention that was consisted of functional communication training and some universal antecedent strategies. And what happened was it produced a stronger and more durable decrease in that challenging behavior than just doing functional communication training alone. Some more research for us. In 1998, I do not want to butcher his name, Hagopian and colleagues found when they combined FCT with different strategies and actually did some modifications in the environment. Just rearranging things in the environment, having certain things accessible, having other things not so accessible. It resulted in greater treatment effectiveness across severe engagements and challenging behavior. And Hanley, back in 2003 and 2014, along with some colleagues, emphasized that function-based treatment packages improve the generalization of different skills. So when you have more than one strategy being implemented at one time with functional communication training, it's going to increase the likelihood for that person to use that communication across different settings with different people. So the thing about FCT is that what it does is teaches what a person should do, right? Instead of a challenging behavior. That's what it does. It teaches a new skill. It helps enhance their communication, and and the goal is to keep everyone safe, including the individual. The preventative strategies reduce the need for that person to use that challenging behavior at all, for them to engage in it at all, or come into reinforcement with it. Most behavior plans in general don't solely rely just on one strategy, and they do combine a teaching component, a preventative component, and also other reinforcement strategies for different for different desirable behaviors to increase the long-term success. So the thing that I would like for you all to take away from this is if we only teach communication, but we're not really changing their environment, we're not setting them up for success, we're asking a person to work harder in the same conditions that actually caused the challenging behavior in the first place. Think about that. If all we're doing is teaching communication and we're not changing anything in the environment. We're not changing how staff is interacting with them. We're not giving them any accommodations or visual supports. We're not creating opportunities for them to have voice and choice. What we're doing is for them to do something harder in the same setting or the same environment that was producing the challenging behavior. So, some common antecedent strategies are listed here, such as providing choice. And this is something you can do a lot for people who engage in behaviors to escape or avoid demands. Offer them a choice. Frame things in like a forced choice if you have to, where it's just two choices. Do you want to do your chores before or after your shower? Maybe it's something like, hey, what color towel do you want to use today when you wipe the table? I have a blue one and I have a pink one. Maybe we need to think about how difficult the task is we're actually trying to get them to do. Sometimes it's like, is it boring? Is the task boring? Like the example with the towel and wiping off a table. Maybe it's just super boring and it's not fun. Can you make it more fun? Maybe we can play some music while we're cleaning and things like that. Maybe they can pick out their own supplies or wear a nice out costume or outfit while they're doing a certain thing. Visual supports and schedules are, I feel like, are just helpful for everybody, including myself. It's just easier to know and predict what is coming up next if I see it, whether that's a Microsoft calendar or a picture card. Those visuals can help a person anticipate what is coming up and decrease the likelihood of engaging in challenging behaviors during like different transitions. Even like a visual timer or stating what is the expectation and having pictures of that. So non-contingent reinforcement, I kind of discussed previously, and that's just saying, hey, before you ask me for the iPad, I'm going to offer it to you. Right. And you would do this in a way where it is balanced with that deprivation and satiation, but maybe creating the opportunities for them to freely access it without them having to do anything would probably help in reducing those challenging behaviors. And when we talked a little bit about structuring transitions, using those timers, those schedules, having predictability, or maybe even having a task analysis where it's step by step of this is what we're doing. This is how you do it, right? And structuring and transition. Hey, first you're going to put on your coat, then you're going to get your lunch. Then we're going to walk to the car. So sometimes just setting things like that and creating a predictable routine with a visual help the people that we serve. So I mentioned some resources within the presentation that I'll be sharing with you guys, and I believe Megan will be able to email these resources to you all as well. But I would like to go over some documents and also some research that can be helpful for when you're creating your functional communication training system. So some FBA resources, functional behavior assessment. This consists of a combination of tools. Primarily, you're going to have your direct assessment, which is that ABC data, and then you have your indirect assessment. There is a third way to complete a FBA, and that's called an experimental analysis. However, in order to do that, it must be implemented by the BCBA and then go through HRC for approval. And a lot of times, people opt out not using that method because it involves actually triggering the challenging behavior and seeing how the person responds in different conditions. So that one is more experimental and it just have a lot of different risk factors associated with it. So what I try to share with teams are these different tools here which can be widely accessed on the internet. Like you can literally just Google it, and it will help structure your interviews with caregivers where the questions are aligned to different functions. And then there's a way for you to score it, and it's kind of straightforward. They give you instructions on it. And the ABC data sheet is one I think that is kind of common where it's just like three boxes and the person records what happens before and after a behavior, I tend to lean more on a checklist and create things that are very individualized rather than just giving a blank template, because I find that I get more accurate data when I do these interviews, talk, learn about some variables, create a list of variables connected to functions before and after, avoid the jargon. And now people don't have to sit down and write out everything. They could just check, and you'll be able to see the pattern easier. Or at least I find it easier to do it this way, but I do create my own a lot of times. So we talked about creating a functional communication response that is easy for the person to do. What I do to better identify this is actually assess the individual skills. And it takes time, you know. So I learn, hey, what is their expressive language skills? How do they express themselves? Verbal and nonverbal, that's a good starting point. However, are they using phrases, sentences? Is it in the correct syntax order? Do they communicate abstract ideas like internal thoughts and emotions? Um, do they imitate? So like, are they matching tone or volume, or having those conversational skills where they're able to be aware of the listener? That interverbal skills, do they go back and forth, or is it like reciprocal? Those are some things that you want to know. Also, as far as like gestures, do they point to the things that they want, or do they just get up and go get it? Right? Do they grab people by the hand and take them to items that they want? Are they using pictures? And what type of pictures is being used matters, right? Is it an actual PEC system, or is it like a communication binder? Because those two look alike, but they're different. They have different procedures on how they're used. Is it just a ring of cards and they flip through them? Do they need one picture at a time? Do they use eye contact or look at things in order to communicate? All of these things will help you design your communication system for that individual. And that's just one. So, two is, how do they receive language? Do they understand multi-step directions? Do they respond to their name? When you say their name, do they actually orient their body to you? Um, do they reliably respond to yes, no questions? Do they understand wait? Do wait sound like no or never? Right? The response effort. So we're talking about that a lot. What is easy for them to do, and especially with those who are going to use like devices or materials, where are their motor skills? When I was at RBT many years ago, one of the individuals I worked with, he was very young and he had a lot of medical issues. He had like a heart issue, and he had some like abnormalities with his bone structure. And one of the things that was very interesting is we learned that his arms do not cross his midline. So when we're presenting things to him, we need to make sure we're presenting the cards or the pictures where he can actually reach them. If we try to put something around his neck, because he had a trach, you know, like some people wear lanyards and things like that, that's not an option for him. So it's very important to understand what is too difficult for the person to do. You know, like we want to use sign language, and that's great. I love sign language. However, are they able to move their hands in the different positions? Um, can they do a pincer grasp? Can they even pick up the card or the picture? Do they have that skill? Do they have pointing as a skill? Number four, get into that preference assessment and figuring out what do they actually like. I've done this where I've just seen people lay out things, or I asked them to, hey, lay out all of their favorite things. And I just stood back and I write down the different things that they interact with and for how long. Sometimes I've done structure preference assessments where I'm lining up different objects and I'm seeing what is it that they're selecting. And this is going to be based on the learner and what they can tolerate. Sometimes if you got a fun thing and they select it, they may not want to give that back to you. It becomes theirs. So this requires some collaboration with the behavior analyst and also a knowing of your learner to see what is best. And in my opinion, you can never go on wrong with just laying things out and seeing what they're interacting with and doing that over multiple sessions or trials or observations and creating kind of like a hierarchy. Like, you know what? It seems like they go to this a lot. If you only do this or create an idea of preference just based on interview without directly working with the individual, you may miss some things that can help while you're doing your communication training. Number five gets into discrimination, and that is the ability to separate things. So say we're using pictures. Can they tell the difference from the two different pictures you're presenting to them? Do they know the difference between the different colors if we're using a color coded system? The red card means stop, the green card means go. Is that a skill that they have? Six talks about their emotional regulation and coping skills and risk factors. Number seven gets back into that FBA and the topography and learning more about the behavior, how it looks like, how long do it typically last, what are some triggers, what are some setting events. And then number eight talks about the generalization of skills. Are you noticing that they're doing similar, are they actually engaging in different skills across settings with different people? So, taking the time to do an assessment of their skills before you even design the system is going to just set everyone up for success. So this is a cheat sheet that I've used with teachers. I've used this with DSPs and different teams. And what it does is it provides a quick function-based outline on possible preventative strategies and reinforcement strategies and how you could respond to challenging behavior. Now, this is not to replace an actual FBA. Instead, is the thought is to complement your FBA by referring to this sheet. So after you've done your assessments, right? You did your skill assessment, you did your behavior assessment, you did some interviews, you got all this information. You see some patterns. What you can do is take that information and start to form up your system. Okay? And here are some articles that have been helpful for me um, in terms of FCT and actually becoming more advanced in how I implement it and more individualized. I think the term communication training it just sounds very simple and basic until you get into the weeds of the things. And these research articles have just helped me a lot to get a better understanding as well as how to increase buy-in with other people a part of the team. So most of the articles explain the why and the how behind FCT. Um, and what I just wanted to see, here we go. The last article here, this is really going to help with developing your system and choosing the right communication response because that alone will just set everything up to fail if you don't have the right communication response for your learner. Going from the bottom and across, and I'm gonna make it quick so we could do some questions. The IWATA in colleagues' article or Hanley and colleagues' article, this helps with steps after you found the function. So again, after you have done your behavior assessment, so you did what you're supposed to do, right? You've assessed the behavior, you created some plans. What do you do next? So this help will help you navigate it, okay? And then this gold article here, this helps create a framework to use with your families, your teams, and stakeholders. Most people don't want to hear about, blah, 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 blah. I'm the expert. I know, listen to me. But sometimes when you say, hey, these other experts, they suggested these things, and this is what we're doing that's in this article. It helps give you support without you being the know-it-all. Let someone else be the know-it-all. And you can actually reference it in your BIPs, in your FBAs, in your plans. So that way people can read it themselves. Sometimes it's kind of dense. So if you want to take the time to like summarize it for them, that would be great. But it just helps people to get a better understanding. Like, you know what? This works. Now we're going to just replicate it. And for the sake of time, I'm going to actually advance the slide and ask you all what changes for a person when they have a way to communicate their needs. Instead of doing or engaging in the challenging behaviors, what do you think changes for them? So I'm going to share my screen so we can see all of you guys' responses. There you go. I see some good responses. Trust. Oh, I love that word. Yes, they can trust when I do what you want me to do, right? And communicate this way you taught me, things happen. That is one of the biggest things that I try to tell teams. The trust is being built. Easier and safer to ask for their needs. Yes. Confidence. Yes. Hey, I can communicate effectively. I can do this. That is what is happening when we respond to those communication responses. Absolutely. Feeling seen. Oh, I hear you. Not only do I hear you, I see you. Yes. These are some really, really good responses. And I, for the most part, agree with all of them. People are able to have their needs met and they can trust the system. They can trust that you are there to help them. All right. So continue to share your responses. And, at the end, they save all of them. So it's always good to go over what people shared and the different thoughts that came up for them. But I do want to move forward and create space for some Q&A if we have time, because I'm looking at the clock. It's 11:59.
What we can do is if you are willing, Sapphire, to stay on for an extra few minutes, we can let those who need to go and respect that time frame of being done at 12. And those of you that want to stay on, have the time to stay on for a few more minutes, we can go a bit over and answer questions if that's okay with you. And then, like I said, anybody who needs to go, please do hop off. I'll do a couple housekeeping things really quickly, and then we'll jump into the Q&A. Um, so as a reminder, when you log off of Zoom, you'll get a satisfaction survey. Please do take a minute to complete that. It gives us great feedback. Then you will receive a survey to your email, and that will be the survey that needs to be completed in order to receive your CEs. That is for traditional CEs like we do with all of our webinars. If you are a BCBA and you are looking for the ACE approved CEs, please email me separately just for BCBAs. And I will get you the survey that you need to complete in order to receive your CEs. Beyond that, I think that's all the housekeeping, and we can jump into some questions. Again, if you need to go, that is totally fine. We want to respect everybody's time. If you want to stay on, please feel free to do so. So some of the questions I've seen pop up, and obviously there's no way we can ever get to all of them. There's so many great questions in here. And I will be sending out the PowerPoint, as well as some of the other great handouts that Sapphire created. So we will get those out to you. And then I will also put in some of the links that were shared in the chat today, because there was a lot of great resources shared in there. So let's see. Trying to find amongst all the questions here. So someone asked in regards to, excuse me, immediate reinforcement, does this lead to manipulation? And what is the correct response to this behavior?
Okay, I love this question as a ABA nerd. So no, I don't think it's manipulation. I think it's they earned that reinforcement, right? They said, "Hey, I need a break," and you quickly give them a break. The thing about it is when you're giving them, so in this example, this is just an example. If you're giving them a break, we want to make sure that it's desirable. So that's the first part because some people it's like, well, they're asking for a break every 5 minutes. And in my mind, I'm like, how are they able to ask for how long are the breaks that you're giving them? Is it matching the magnitude? Maybe they're asking for a break. Maybe it's a behavior that has multiple functions. Maybe they're asking for a break in iPad on their break. Oh, that's too much. We're giving them too much. Is it? What if you just meet them where they're at? Honor that response, give them the reinforcement at a level where it's valuable. What you're going to notice is the communication response is something that is going to become more consistent from that individual. And then we're going to build up the tolerance for them to wait. And then eventually, hopefully, for them to not always receive it. But first, you got to meet people where they're at. So, no, I don't think that's a form of manipulation. I think it's just a part of the process. And this is a process for the long road. Like it's not a quick thing. It's going to take time.
And I think that answers another question that was brought up about suggestions for if someone continuously asks for a break and doesn't do the required task, such as showering or their chores. So another question here, and this may have been addressed, I think. So how exactly do you teach the replacement behavior, especially when the behavior is so embedded, such as hitting or swatting as a way of communicating and wanting attention? And again, I think some of that's been answered, but do you have any kind of final thoughts on that?
Yes. So, as much as possible, you want to start when the person is not escalated. So, the replacement behavior we're talking about is communication. So, first, you want to start before the person is riled up, or appearing anxious. You want to start there. You want to, it's going to seem like you're just giving in or you're just giving them what they want. But what we're doing is creating trust in a safe environment. So that's where you want to start. Okay. You want to start where they're calm. And then you want to not sit down and lecture teach because I think a lot of times uh we conceptualize teaching the way that we teach in like our American school system. Instead, what you want to do is kind of more like of a practice. You're going to present the communication response you want them to engage in. Tell them when they do this thing, something happens. And that something is going to be your reinforcement in the form of acknowledgement of their efforts and the function of behavior. And you're going to do that over and over and over in a calm space. So, for example, if it's a break, you could say, hey, when you give me this break card, you get a break. And that's what we're doing all day. We're just going back and forth, providing breaks, and you're giving that verbal praise and going back and forth. And what happens is over time, when a situation arises and they have a choice to use the break card or that aggression, you're going to start seeing them choose the break card. But the first step is to teach it in a way where you're actually just implementing the training over and over again in a safe environment. That was wordy, but yeah.
No, I think that's helpful. Thank you. And then there's also been a few questions about caregiver buy-in, basically. How do we get caregivers to buy into a program? Um, do you have any thoughts on how to get someone, especially with caregivers who are kind of fearful of change? How do we get them on board with FCT?
Yeah, and that can be hard. So I try to include caregivers from the very beginning, from the assessment process. As we're assessing these skills, we're assessing challenge and behavior. I like to assess caregiver values. What is important to them and what is it that they want for the individual we're serving? And I try to make those connections. I also try to, again, model it in real time with them so they can see what it is that I'm doing, and it helps provide the like real life evidence right now in this moment, like, hey, maybe this thing can be effective. So I try to include them in the beginning. I try to learn about the caregiver's preferences and their limitations. Identify what is important to them. What are the goals that they want to have for this individual? What do they value? And start making statements and plans connections to that. So I'm saying this in an oversimplified way because it takes time. It takes time. You may not be able to hit the ground running. The first step is just really allowing them to vent. Sometimes that's a part of it. Sometimes people don't want to hear how to solve it. They just want to talk about it, and creating space to meet even the caregivers where they're at and just listen to them vent for a while. So that might be a starting place. So those are some of the ways that I increase buy-in.
Absolutely. Maybe we'll do one or two more here quickly and try to be done by about 12:10, if that's okay. So one question was if you have any suggestions for staff who have to assist in a large group that all have different wait time tolerances.
Ooh, that is so hard. And if I can say, hey, we need a 4-to-1 ratio everywhere and we can make that happen, I would. But what I tend to do is just create a risk, kind of a quick risk assessment. Knowing your individuals and knowing the people who have the longer wait tolerance versus the ones who need the immediate, and creating a flow where you can attend to the people who need it more, right? Who requires it more upfront, but also acknowledge those who can wait. I'm not saying just leave them out in the cold. We need to also check in with them. So I call it like a risk assessment. If you don't get to that person right away, what happens? Do they have the ability to wait? Can we provide reinforcement for those who do? Right? If they're waiting longer. So again, if they're waiting longer because they have that as a skill set and they're asking for just some time with you, is there a way for you to give them that reinforcement at a magnitude where it is sufficient for them? Like, at the end of the week, it's just going to be one-on-one time for me and you because every day I'm at day program, I'm dealing with these people over here. So at the end of the week, every Friday, I'm going to just set aside this time for you. So I think creating systems like that overlap where you're really providing support for this high needs individual, make sure you just take out the time to acknowledge them. I also think that's where your visuals is going to come into play and your materials, and then some really good training for other people who can help out on the floor. Um, I think all of those things together can help.
Absolutely. Thank you. And we'll do one final one if that's okay. Um, and this is a question I love getting because I think, it's so important to think of the answers and how we respond to this. But what should we do for the individuals who are behaving well, other than just praise? Because they basically see someone being rewarded for having behaviors, right? And so I think that's always one that I like to address with groups.
Okay, so yeah, that's also a good one. So I think is first for me, it is like a mindset things, right? And this goes into that social emotional learning. What is fair is not always equal, right? What a person need may not appear to be equal to what other people are receiving, but it is just, it's justified because we know that that's what that person needs. So I like to do lessons like that in groups. And one of the things that I do is I do the one like, hey, everybody got some type of sick ailment, right? You got a headache, you got a stomach ache, you got a achy tooth. But I give everybody a band-aid. And that's a way to help explain, like, do a band-aid help everybody? No, we all may need different things, and some people may require more than others. And then I think this also connects with the idea of creating individualized reinforcement where it's not just verbal praise, but also do preference assessments for the people who don't have extensive supports. Find out what is it that they really, really, really like and provide it to them, even if it's on that once a Friday or periodically throughout the day. Let them know, like, hey, I know I'm not, constantly talking to you. However, I do see you. And I want to acknowledge you based on your preference. So some of those preferences, maybe they want a break. Maybe they want one-on-one time. Maybe they want to do some fun activity. Maybe they like to have a favorite sweet treat or something. So I think that teaching what is fair is not equal, plus acknowledging people on a schedule of reinforcement that is a little bit more thinner, meaning like you can go a week with doing something that's more grand, or I think that helps.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we will go ahead and wrap up. Thank you again so much for your time today, Sapphire, and for all the great information. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Um, Final reminder, please do complete the survey that pops up at the end following Zoom. Just gives us great feedback. And then if you are looking for a general CE for this webinar, please complete the survey that comes to your email. And if you are a BCBA looking for CEs, please email me directly at mcramer, so MCRAMER @hope.us, and I will get you the survey you need to complete in order to receive your CEs. So again, thank you all so much for your time today. This will be posted on YouTube at some point once we get the next round of trainings posted. And so you can always look for our webinars there as well. So thank you all again so much for your time this morning, and have a great rest of your day and week. Bye.